The beginnings of the original PlayStation was a fascinating time. There was much hype around it in terms of its potential to be a great technological achievement, and of course, there were third-party developers that were willing to back the system from the beginning with great games. After a few years into its lifespan, we were starting to see it change the culture of gaming. A plethora of high-quality games with very recognizable main characters were released for the PlayStation, and the console started to have a growing list of familiar faces. It was beginning to develop an ecosystem of mascots very similar to what happened with the Nintendo and Sega brand on their previous consoles. Around the 1998 mark, we were starting to see a family of characters and mascots associated with the PlayStation brand, where Nintendo had Super Mario, Link, and Kirby. Sega had Sonic the Hedgehog, Toe Jam and Earl, and Alex Kidd. Sony's console slowly started to gain its own family of characters that gamers were starting to recognize as a part of the PlayStation family. Characters like Crash Bandicoot, Cloud Strife, Spyro the Dragon, Parappa the Rapper, and Solid Snake were unanimously associated by gamers with the PlayStation brand, and that's just naming a few. Sony was racking up quite the group of characters that gamers started to recognize, and that was a good thing. It meant that they were onto something, and whether it was intentional or just plain luck, they were successfully replicating what Nintendo and Sega had done so well before them. Trustworthy faces and characters associated with quality games with memorable experiences. For Sony, during the mid-90s, it also seemed like every single game company that was either a first-party Sony developer or third-party developer wanted to make an exclusive mascot for the PlayStation. Since it was very much up for grabs in the early days of the PlayStation, these developers seemed ready to jump on this bandwagon of trying to create the next great face or mascot for Sony's console. Now, we can debate on who the original PlayStation's main mascot was back in those days, and that certainly is something that not even Sony would be able to confirm. But it seemed like collectively, Crash Bandicoot took the mantle as the PlayStation's mascot for the original PlayStation. A lot of it could do with the commercials of him instigating the security guards at Nintendo headquarters, or simply because the game just sold incredibly well, and he was a constant reoccurring character. But that didn't mean that Crash's title was safe, and it didn't stop game companies from making platforming games that would try to steal and win over Crash Bandicoot fans. Enter Jersey Devil, a platforming action game developed in 1998 by Behavior Interactive. From its look and gameplay mechanics, its lead character had all the makings of another member that could perhaps join the PlayStation's family of mascots. It was heavily marketed as the next Crash Bandicoot game, and the graphics and soundtrack alone were enough to grab the attention of gamers, but it just never gained the momentum that Sony expected. Looking back at Jersey Devil for this special Halloween episode of the Select Gaming, we find ourselves wondering, does Jersey Devil stand the test of time as a worthy game title of being remembered as a solid action platformer and memorable character in the early PlayStation mascot family? Or is it just another minor footnote in the PlayStation's early list of platformer games? Subscribe to the Select Gaming to keep up to date with all our latest videos. This is Jersey Devil for the PlayStation. The Saturday morning cartoon vibes are very strong with Jersey Devil's intro, and being met with this animated introduction to the world and characters is something to admire. The plot of Jersey Devil is extremely basic for the most part and pretty easy to follow. On a dark and quiet night, the evil Dr. Narf's assistant, Dennis, happens to find a small purple baby devil in their neck of the woods. Excited by this discovery, Dennis brings our protagonist to Dr. Narf and then proceeds to experiment on this purple infant. Before getting a chance to do any slicing or dicing, our baby Jersey Devil destroys the doctor's lab by releasing releasing a bottle of nitro and destroys his lab. Flash forward to many years later, and the city that these characters inhabit is ridden with crime and destruction, caused by Dr. Narf and his evil mutant vegetable army. But fear not, the Jersey Devil is now all grown up and is strong enough to take on the evil doctor along with his henchmen and save Jersey City. Essentially, Jersey Devil fits comfortably in the realm of a classic superhero story or old-school serialized action TV show. It's strange because the way he was portrayed in the TV commercials was that of some sort of villain or mischievous instigator, but there really isn't anything in this game that makes him come off as a troublemaker other than him just obstructing the doctor's plans to save Jersey City. The main area of the game is the city square, where the different doors or gates lead you to different sections of the game's levels, and where you'll explore the different realms and conquer bosses to progress in the game's story. There are two aspects of Jersey Devil that will instantly pull you into the game's atmosphere. The first thing is the game's graphics. A combination of cel-shaded textures and a lush color palette really give this 3D platformer a distinctive look. The second aspect is the music. It has some of the most well-composed, cinematic-feeling music in a game that reinforces the look and really amps up the superhero theme. I mean, can we just take a moment to appreciate the first music track you get in the first stage? This was the first game that composer Gilles Lavelle scored, and he absolutely knocked it out of the park in every way. I can't think about Jersey Devil without thinking about the music in it. I mean, that's just how much of an impact this music had on me personally while playing. Jersey Devil's gameplay can be summed up simply. You jump and glide your way to different platforms or sections and punch or tailspin your enemies into oblivion. You can also push large objects or throw boxes at vantage points to move closer to your destination. Jersey Devil, though, is one of these platforming games that is sometimes incredibly literal with the genre. Seriously, it has platforms that are just floating in midair sometimes. But most of the time, there are some well-designed sections that have some smart little puzzles or obstacles to overcome. Jersey City is filled with a bunch of interesting and sometimes downright weird as hell enemies, but it makes for an enjoyable and entertaining journey that keeps you guessing as to what baddies will be next as you progress. With every new section, you'll have to gather up letters to spell out the evil doctor's surname of Narf before you're able to move forward on your journey. Most of the letters will be sitting on ledges or hidden away, and sometimes other letters are obtained by defeating enemies. Jersey Devil is structured a bit like a collect-a-thon, and you'll be searching every nook and cranny during your journey for those much-needed letters to move on. One of the things you'll notice as you start Jersey Devil is that the game is incredibly generous when it comes to the numbers of lives you get. For myself, after the first 30 minutes of Jersey Devil, I was gifted with 21 lives. Now, why would this be? Most platforming games are usually cautious about giving out lives so easily, making the whole point of thinking before you jump always front and center and never an afterthought. Games like Super Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot are good examples of how lives are sparingly given out, and when you get a 1-up, you usually feel like you earned it. Could it be that Behavior Interactive likes giving out lives like candy at Halloween? Or was this secretly a Valentine's Day game and the code was written as a love letter to our devilish purple hero by the developers, who just want him to be a strong, healthy devil boy? No. For you see, dear viewer, there's a real reason for the abundance of lives, and most of it stems from the fact that Jersey Devil has some of the cheapest deaths that I have ever seen in any platforming video game. In games like Super Mario 64, if you weren't paying attention and died, you knew that Nintendo's game was so well designed that it was your own fault. And in the original Crash Bandicoot, if you missed a platform and fell into a spike of pits for the 5th time in a row, you also knew that, you know what, actually, that game was pretty cheap. I take it back. Sorry, Crash. The biggest offense in Jersey Devil's game design comes from a combination of claustrophobic stages and the inability to sometimes maneuver properly because of the stubborn camera, or because our purple hero is the victim of many glitches that have him falling into the ground to his death. The game is very aware of how cheap the deaths can be, and that's one of the reasons why I feel it's so generous with the number of lives that it's always giving you, especially at the beginning of the game. It could have been that when the game was done being developed, during game testing, Behavior may have realized that they had created a somewhat difficult game, and their only solution, instead of redesigning stages or sections, was to just throw in as many lives as possible to ease the burden of the constant deaths that players would experience. Jersey Devil is one of these games that starts out so well and full of promise, but it does take a sharp turn towards a somewhat frustrating experience at times due to some of the game's level designs. You fall off ledges a lot in Jersey Devil, like a lot. Sometimes you'll be surrounded by narrow ledges that are just impossible to stay on, holes in the floor. Traps could knock you into a hole. Enemies or bosses could hit you during mid-jump or glide and cause you to fall. Or simply a glitch in the game will have you falling right past a ledge towards your inevitable doom. Falling is probably the main way you'll die in Jersey Devil. The Haunted Mansion is by far the most frustrating level in the game. It's almost as if every single floorboard in this haunted house is a booby trap. It has absolutely no chill, and you'll be falling to your death many times, and it seems like there is just no way to avoid this with its low ceilings and small space. I died so much in this level that I stopped caring about the hostages that you're supposed to be saving and just wanted the level to be over. If you want to know who the real hostage was in this stage, it's the Jersey Devil, having to deal with all the pain and agony of this stage while all you little bastards sit in your cozy cages watching the Jersey Devil die again and again from your ivory towers. You freaking hostages disgust me. Aside from a few of the levels that are a bit of a drag, Jersey Devil for the most part is a decent platformer. It's doing some cool things that make for pretty compelling gameplay in certain sections. I particularly enjoyed the stage where you are foot surfing down a tunnel gathering up things. The speed in the game when it happens is enjoyable, and some of the boss fights were surprisingly clever. In one of the boss battles, you play a one-on-one basketball game to defeat the boss, and it almost feels like a mini game in itself. Who would want to kill these dudes when they just look like they're having such a damn good time? This game really plays up its tongue-in-cheek humor, and it's hard to get upset at it when it's trying so hard to do so much to win you over, especially if you have an affection towards movie monster culture. Boss battles, a basketball minigame, a surfing stage, there's a lot of variety packed in this platformer. Maybe that's one of the reasons the game falls below expectations. In trying to give the gamers so much variety, it sort of feels unnecessary and a bit of a hodgepodge of diverse stages. Sure, the foot surfing stage ends up being incredibly fun, but then you're forced in other stages to slow things to a crawl. A lot of moments in Jersey Devil are you waiting to execute the perfect jump. An unforgiving example of this is the sewer level where you need to jump on the backs of turtles and let them swim you over to the next section of the level to continue jumping on the back of another turtle. And well, if you didn't feel confident with taking that jump because of your timing, too bad for you, because now you gotta wait some more. You'll wait and wait, and you'll wait some more in Jersey Devil. And with platforming games, waiting around for ages just isn't a good look. There should always be some sort of constant movement moving you closer to your destination. There's a lot of trial and error in Jersey Devil with sometimes very little payoff. Even with the many flaws of Jersey Devil, it's still hard for me to dislike the game. It's a product of its time, but it's aware that it was going up against the big boys. So the developers were really trying to make an experience that didn't feel like those games, and love it or hate it, Jersey Devil doesn't feel like any of those other platforming games from that time at all. It's in a realm of itself and really has a persona of its own It's less linear than a game like Crash Bandicoot, but not as complex as a game like Spyro the Dragon. Jersey Devil sits comfortably in between that level of game design and presentation. The art direction and music alone have a wonderful production, and you can tell that there was a lot of love and care put into this game's appearance, but just maybe that wasn't quite enough for the game to be successful back when the game released in 1998. Jersey Devil in a lot of ways has aged relatively decent. The thing is with games like Jersey Devil is that, sadly, we're never going to get games like this ever again. It's a time capsule of days long gone from the video game industry. In some ways, Jersey Devil seemed like a conceptual experiment to see if a series around a devilish mascot character could have wide commercial appeal, and I can't help but find it intriguing in where it sits in the early PlayStation's catalog because of that. For me, I would have loved to have seen Jersey Devil become a franchise and reoccurring PlayStation mascot. Unfortunately, it wasn't very well received at the time due to obviously better competition that was coming from Sony, Nintendo, and other developers. Jersey Devil is just one of those games that kinda got lost in the sauce in a time where the number of platforming games were exploding on the PlayStation alongside JRPGs. To make it in a world of platforming games at that time, you had to be incredibly good, and at that point in time, Jersey Devil was just okay. And okay wasn't good enough in 1998, especially with lackluster sales, to get warranted a sequel. If you can get over the technical faults of the game, you'll find yourself having a decent experience, especially if you played it during the month of October no less. And you'll probably agree that it's a game that does deserve to be remembered. Maybe we get a sequel one day, or maybe at least an appearance of Jersey Devil in a PlayStation Battle Royale future game? What do you say, Sony? For myself, I'm a fan of the game and character. Jersey Devil will always stand out as a good B-title platforming game. It was an ambitious game that really tried to do something different in this genre that only elevated the PlayStation brand in the long run. Thank you for joining me on this episode of The Select Gaming. If you like what you've seen and heard, give us a like and subscribe. This is Dusty Maxwell, and have a happy Halloween, all you boys and ghouls. We'll see you on the next one.